Hello everyone, welcome back. We're on the fourth video now in the series. And in this video, we're really just going to go through the Angular command line interface and adding a new page to our Angular website. And with that, we're going to jump over to Visual Studio Code. Everything in the Visual Studio project that we have now, we generated in the videos preceding this one. But you should be able to do these steps in your own projects if you happen to not be following the whole series. And so to start off, I'm going to go ahead and go to the path of our Angular project. And I'm going to browse down. For now, I'm just going to keep the same structure since we're not really fine-tuning this project yet. I don't like a lot of the conventions that were put even into the .NET side of things or the client side of things, and we'll clean those up to be my preferences, which I think are better for the most part. But for now, we're just going to add a new page to the other three. So we have the home page, we have the counter page, and we have the fetch data page, and those were all defined route-wise in here. I think the first thing we'll want to do is to open up a command terminal, and let's go ahead and let's go ahead and open the terminal to our app folder. So all of the Angular commands, as we previously mentioned, begin with ng, and then the following parameters after them, there's a whole bunch of them, including, I think we've already gone through the update command. So now we want to do some commands that can generate new code. So we can type ng generate, or we could just type ng space g, which is the way that I normally write it. So we have ng space g, and then space what do we want to generate? Well, in this case, we want to generate a new component, which in this scenario is equivalent to a new page. So again, we could type in component, or we could just type in C for short. So we're going to do a new component. And what is the component name? Now, for the naming of these components, we're going to do it in the proper camel case. But when it generates the files, it's going to do it in the convention that Angular uses, which is great, which is just going to be all lowercase with dashes in between the capital letters that we select. So what page should we make? I guess we'll just make a page called testing, and we'll just hit enter. And this is going to use the schematics. And what did it tell us? It found more than one module in here. So don't know why it says it found more than one module, but we'll go ahead and specify the module ourselves, which is the app module. So I believe just dash module space app should work. Depending on the folder that you're in, it should be able to normally detect the module by itself. If for some reason it doesn't, that was a perfect opportunity to show you that. And if we look over here in our code now, we have a folder called testing. It's generated the HTML. It's generated the SCSS file, which we told it to generate the SCSS going forward. It's generated the spec file, which is that client-side unit testing with Karma. And of course, it generated our actual component. So I think real quick, we'll just discuss what is in this component. So we have the selectors again, and we showed you how those get referenced inside of the HTML files. We have the template URL, which is the testing.component.html. And they always just generate with the HTML of a paragraph that says the component name worked. And the SCSS is blank. And back to the TypeScript now. So we have a class that we're exporting, and that's just because we're going to import it other places in the module, for instance. And we've got implements the onInitialize, interface. So what we want, or what it already generated for us, was a method that follows the convention that Angular expects. When you implement the onInitialize interface, it's going to actually, when it calls your component and it reaches the lifecycle stage where it says, hey, I'm initialized, it's going to call this method here. So most of the time, what you're going to end up doing is using one of the following. You also have the after view initialized. So again, I've added a new interface and it's telling me that I haven't actually implemented this interface yet. So what are we going to do? We're going to do ng after view init. And you can see that because of the extensions we have with the Angular language service, it's giving us a lot of IntelliSense and templating to be able to just tab off of things and get the code. So the differences between these are minimal, but they are important. Most of the time I do leave my code in the onInitialized. But if you're doing more advanced things, like maybe you have references to, this won't mean anything to you yet, but let's say we're referencing an HTML element that is inside of inside of this page here. Maybe this paragraph has an ID of, testing paragraph. So if we wanted to reference it by name, we would just come in here and we would do testing paragraph. And we would just go ahead and say, what is it? Well, it's going to be a private variable, and the name of it's going to be testing ref. And the type, in this case, we'll just say it's an HTML element. Probably just telling us it's never been used. Okay, no problem. So it wants us to go ahead and say that it's nullable because it's not always going to have a value in it. Now, if we wanted to access anything about this reference to the HTML, it's not actually going to be available yet for the ng onInitialize. So this is just going to be null. The testing ref will just be null. And if you tried to use it there, you'd start getting errors. But if you start using it inside of the after view init, then from that point on, the value will actually be set. So there are times where you'll want to use one or the other, or maybe both. There's nothing wrong with having them both set up. Just know that this onInitialize is basically being called before the HTML and everything is set up, and the references are all tied together. And this after view initialize is after all of the HTML has been processed and referenced and things have been replaced, etc. There's other lifecycle commands. We might as well just talk about the main other one right now, and that's going to be onDestroy. So when this component is finished and when they browse away from it to another page, what it's going to call is the ng onDestroy function. And this is where you would clean up any of your observable subscriptions and anything else you want to clean up. So those are the three main life cycles, and we've generated a component just like that. Now, the reason why we got this error up here that it needed to find a module, and it did give us an option to skip it, but what that's doing is it went into the actual module that we specified, or that it found automatically, hopefully in most of the time, and you can see that it now has this declaration as well as the import statements for it, for this testing component. So that's telling it when this app module loads up, it also needs to load up or build, or which, depending on the process that's running. It's also telling it that the testing component is part of this module. Now, having that stuff alone doesn't make this a valid page that we can just start routing to /testing for the URL. In order to actually make it available, and I'm going to go ahead and not make it available as the URL yet, and just show you that the steps that we added by declaring it and everything, at the moment, they just make it available to use in our other components. So if we were to go into our home page and we were to go down to the end, now again, all of the components that we generate on this project, because we haven't changed our angular.json file, they all start with app. So if we do app testing, And we don't have any properties that we're passing into it or anything yet. And again, everything just changed because my formatter went off when I hit save. So if we run this project, let me go ahead and save our testing one here. And we'll run this project. And as soon as it loads up, I'll take you over to my browser. Okay. And I see that my background still shows video 3 there. Whoops. Okay, so now we went ahead and we compiled successfully. We're at the home page. Let me move this terminal window so you can actually see down. And you can see now that it says testing works at the bottom. So anything we put inside of this testing component, maybe we reference an image, and I'll just reference a bad one, but I'll go ahead and save that. Let's go ahead and terminate that. And again, because we have the hot reload going, everything should just be refreshing by itself. We'll go back to the browser, and you can see we've got a broken image here now because I didn't actually pick a good image. So now let's say that we actually want to add, and we actually want to add where if we type in or we have a link that goes to /testing, it actually works. And right now, nothing happened. It didn't match anything, and we don't actually handle the invalid routes at the moment. So it didn't actually load, and you can see that in the console, you're seeing the errors. If you're not a big fan of using the Debug Console inside of Visual Studio for the client-side stuff, if you hit the F12 key in your browser, this works for Chrome and Edge and Firefox. I believe all of them that I've ever tried out. And if we were to go to the console here, you can see that it actually told us that it couldn't match any routes following the segment testing. Okay? So let's go ahead and make that work. We'll go back to our app module. And we still have the routing all defined in here, which we'll take out and clean up later. But let's add a new one. So we're going to add the path. And for our path, we'll put testing. And just to show you that they don't have to be the same, so you can differentiate between what's happening, I'm going to put testing 2 as the path. And I'm going to say that the component that we want to show the user when they actually do that is going to be the testing component. So we'll save our changes here. We'll go back to our browser. It's already reloaded, just still has the broken image. And now if we were to type in testing, of course testing still shouldn't work, which it doesn't. But if we were to type in testing 2, we now had the route actually successfully take us to this component, the same one that we had embedded down here earlier. So that kind of just shows you that you can have components embedded in other components, as well as, having them be their own thing as well. So if you were to make a report, for instance, and you wanted to, maybe you had a page that had a whole bunch of reports showing on it, you could build that each report individually, and then you could reference those components all together in one page, in a different page. So that's good to know. The other part, let's go ahead and switch this back to testing for now. If you wanted to, let's see, do any logging, obviously you could do those. Now, we don't have any logging set up on the client yet besides the console logger, so we won't go into injecting any of that yet. We've added a new page. We've added it to the routes. We've got it working. The other things you can generate, and we'll go more into depth of these later, but just to kind of show you what's available, if we do the ng, and we're back in the terminal now, and we're in the app folder, but I think as long as we're in the client app folder in general, these ng commands will work, but we'll do ng space g space, And if we just do an enter, we should get a help message or an error message saying, hey, what do you actually want to generate? So if we just kind of look down here, you can see it's got a couple of different templates available. We can make guards, and guards are classes that we can apply to our routes. So if we go back to our module or our routing here, we could apply a guard to this path and say, hey, most of the time you would do something like this to, to do permissions denied kinds of messages. So maybe they don't have permission to do the fetch data. You would just go ahead and, I won't do too much of it, but you could apply, and that's just because I don't remember it off the top of my head, but let's just see if we can find it listed here quickly. I don't see it off the top, but obviously once we get to that stage in the videos, I'll talk more about the guards. So the guards is just going to be how you're going to guard these routes from being accessed, and whether you're using some sort of role-based authentication or I don't know, who knows what's going to be out there by the time you watch these videos. But the other things we can create are interceptors. Something like an interceptor is often used to intercept all of the HTTP requests that are being made. So you can capture all of those and maybe do some sort of caching, or, there's all kinds of things that you can do with interceptors. One of the things I've done before is to make a site-wide kind of loading bar. So anytime there's an HTTP request that's out there, until it resolves, I'll show them a little spinning indicator. And that's just, I can do it by an interceptor, apply it to my whole site layout, and it's not something I'm doing on a page-by-page basis anymore. Interfaces. Well, we kind of talked a little bit about interfaces. Hopefully you're familiar with interfaces in general. But here you can see that they've got some predefined interfaces, and this would just be if we're going to make an interface which just says, hey, I've got some properties or I've got some functions that you have to implement if you want to actually call yourself something that's my interface. So if you want other parts of the application to accept you as an interface for onInitialize, you have to, and I'll go ahead and drill into this. Again, I'm going to hit Control with the click. You can see here that this is an interface that's being exported that says, hey, if you want to be this interface, you have to implement a method that's ng onInitialize here with a return type of void, which is nothing. So those are what interfaces are. There's all kinds of uses for them, and it's not just for this lifecycle stuff. You can make them for anything, but it's just a way to tell other parts of the program that even if you don't know, let's go back to our testing component. So even if you don't know that I'm a testing component, if you know that I am saying that I'm part of the onInitialize interface, or I have implemented it, then I will have this method inside of me and you can call me. The same thing with these other ones. So let's go down to library. This isn't something you'll do inside of this project itself for the most part. If you want to start a new Angular library, you're going to do this in a separate folder, in a separate project, and you'll make your library. The library is just a reference that you can call that has code in it. Most of the time you would build a library if you expect to reuse that code over and over, or maybe you want to share your code with other people out there on the internet. You want to post it on the repository like npm.js or something like that. So when people run the npm command to install something, those are not in all cases, because not all of them are Angular based, but most of the time if they start with something like ngx, you know that they're an Angular library, an Angular 2 or higher library, and they were, I don't want to say that they were built using this, but they're built in a project structure that's matched by this library template. We've got modules. We've discussed a little bit. Our application just has one module at the moment, but there's plenty of reasons to not be building your application all as one module. And in this series, we're going to make lots of modules for different categories that we're building. I normally have almost nothing in the app module by the time my project is set up, and it's all in other modules that are loaded. And some of the nice things you can do by having them in other modules is you can do like lazy loading on those modules. That means like when somebody comes to your website and they go to this module for the first time, normally this module being app module here, it's going to try to obviously load up all the related JavaScript and styles that are referenced in these components that are referenced in this module. So it's got to do all that loading, and the more modules or the more components you have inside of this app module, the more it has to do on that initial page load. One of the things you do to get around that is you can do lazy loading on your module, and we'll go through that in the routes, once we actually build a different module. But what those will do is we can say, hey, we've got other modules, but don't try to load any of the code related to them until somebody actually tries to go to one of the components or one of the pages that's part of this. We've got pipes. Pipes are very interesting. They're very useful. You'll have plenty of them. Some of the built-in pipes, let's just see if we can't remember one off the top of our head. So let's say we had a span, and maybe, again, I don't want to go too much into the different things right now, but let's just say we have a public property, and it's going to be called username. As you watch me code in the JavaScript, especially on the TypeScript side of the house, sometimes I'll put the public, sometimes I won't. If you don't put it, it's just implied that it's public. And you need the variables to be public if you want to bind to them in the HTML, which is what we're about to do. So let's just say we have a variable or property called username. And I'm just going to say that the username is a string, and the value of it is, we'll just say the small bang. Okay, so now we have a variable property we can reference inside of our HTML, and I do have the point of the pipes coming up shortly. But we're going to do two open squiggly brackets, and in the IntelliSense went ahead and finished them off for me as well and closed them out. So what do we want to put inside of this? We want to put the username. And so I'm going to go ahead and save that. And since we have our project debugging, I'm going to flip over to the code. And you can say here now, let's go ahead and get rid of that bad image. Here now on the home page, since we had the component referenced in our home page, you can say testing works, and then a span with the username that we set, which in this case is small bang. So maybe you want to transform the usernames. Maybe people log in with mixed case or all sorts of different things. Let's just say in this case we want to convert all of the usernames to uppercase. So there is a pipe that was included in the Angular projects that are referenced in our project.json, and we'll go ahead and just go to it real quick, and you can see here that it's just called uppercase pipe. It implements the pipe transform interface, and so it's going to get called, it's going to do its thing here, and we don't see the code here of course, but all it's basically doing is doing like a to upper with probably the proper localize on it. So now if we save that page and we go back to our browser, you can see now that it's uppercase. So the reason that these are called pipes, and there's plenty of things you can do with them, but is because they all follow a pipe here. So you have the property that you wanted to transform in some way, in this case for this pipe anyway, and we're saying so we want to use the pipe, we want to use a pipe on this property, or whatever this value is. And obviously it doesn't have to be a property. We could have just typed in something ourselves, like not a property, and it's going to work the same way on that. So if we go back to the browser, you can see it just, that value is what's being piped in to whatever this is. And in this case, there's a pipe in Angular called uppercase, and so that's pretty much what a pipe is and how they work. It's just the value or whatever you want to apply it to, a pipe, and then the class or whatever the pipe actually is. Next we have resolvers. I don't know too much about this myself, so I'll skip past it. If you get to a point, obviously Google is your friend. Now services are not referencing web services. They're not referencing the API at all. That's not what this is. These services are, they're classes and code that are able to be injected into our components. So if we go back to our testing component, what do we have that we can inject at the moment? Well, I guess we'll go ahead and write one real quick. So what do we need to do? We'll do ng space g space s works, but we'll go ahead and do service. And then we need to do the name of the service. So again, we want to use the camel case naming convention here because Angular expects it. And what we will do is we'll just call this test injection. And we don't have to put service, it'll just go ahead and append that itself. Now we'll probably get a warning about the module again. Let's see if that's true. Okay, no, because it doesn't actually add anything into the module, because I'll show you in just a second. So if we go to our module, or our new service, sorry, you can see it created a test file for it, and it created the TypeScript file itself. Now in this case, there's no SCSS file, and there's no HTML file that got generated, because that's for components. These services they won't normally have anything to do with HTML or styling or anything like that. So what can we do with this service? Well, before we do anything with it, let's just look up here. We have this injectable attribute. I'm not actually sure if that's what they're called in JavaScript, but that's what I'll be calling it. And it's got provided in root. So what's happening here is if something tries to inject this test injectable, it's going to go ahead and know that it needs to declare it in the module that's related to what is coming up. So normally if you didn't have that injection part, let me go to the right page, if you didn't have this where it's provided in root, what you'd have to do is you'd have to declare it in your module, something like test injection service, like that. Now, I'm sorry, it's telling us that it wouldn't be a component to declare, but what we would have to do is say we're going to provide it to components and stuff inside of here. So if we come down here and we do the test injection service, now we're saying that we can provide this service from this module to the things that ask for it. But again, because we have the for root, I'm going to leave that out and not put it, just so you guys understand fully that that provided in root is making it where there's, and I find it hard to actually call it a singleton because you can get different versions of this service in your code depending on the modules, like has one module provided it and one hasn't, but for the most part you can think of this loosely as a singleton. So if you don't know what that means, it just means that anytime somebody tries to get a reference to this test injection service, they all get and share the same one. So keep that in mind. If you have two different pages and maybe they're both showing up on the page at the same time because you wrote two different reports and they're both showing up on this reports page, that they would both get the same instance of this injection service as we've got it set up right now. So we've got the constructor. We don't actually need to do anything in this service, but let's just go ahead and make a method that we can call from these other services. So we'll just go ahead and do I'm trying to get rid of the public for you guys because that's not normally a common practice that you would see in these files here. Let's just do, inside of our test injection service, we'll just have a method called test. And I'm not loving that it replaced what I wrote. But now we have a new method called test, and we're going to say it returns nothing. And the reason why it freaked out a little bit on us is because I put that in the wrong spot, and I accidentally wrote it inside of the constructor block. So we've got the constructor here that's normal again, without my mistake inside of it, and we've got a method here called test that returns nothing. But inside of it, what we can do is we'll just do a console.log, and we'll just say the test method was called. And maybe just to show you that it's actually a singleton, what we can do is we'll add a property. We'll get to that a little bit later. Just believe me that it's pretty much a singleton for now. So now we have this method and we have our test injection service. What do we do with it? How do we use it inside of one of our components? Well, again, just to hit on it one more time, because we did provide it in root, we don't have to do anything else special to get access to it. But what we can do is then we can go inside of, let's go inside of our counter component, because we can reuse this over and over. And here, if we go ahead and create a constructor for this class, and by that I just mean constructor, we don't want to pass, well, we are going to pass a parameter in for sure. So this is how you do, and again, the next video is going to focus a lot more on the dependency injection in general. But this is, since we've gone down the list and we're doing a service real quick, what we'll go ahead and do is we're going to say that we're going to be, I do most things as private, but unless you need it to be accessed by the HTML and stuff, which most of the time you shouldn't need to do from a service directly, but we'll do private. We're just going to name any variable name we want for this service, but obviously it should make sense. So we'll do test injection service. And what's the type of this service? Well, the type is test injection service. Now I'm tabbing a lot to get the autocomplete. If you're just typing and you're not tabbing, make sure you take note of this import statement that was generated up here, where we still had to say that this class, this test injection service, came from this file. So keep that in mind. If you're typing like this and you are using the IntelliSense and you tab, it should, as long as you have the right extensions, the right plugins for Visual Studio Code, it should bring those in for you automatically. So now we have this test service, test injection service variable. What we can do is we can make use of it. So we'll just say this, because we're in this context of this class at the moment, this component. And obviously you can see our test injection service variable there. And you can see that we have this test method inside of it. So let's go ahead and call that. And now let's just go ahead and save all of our changes all at the same time. Okay, we'll go back to our website now. And if we were to go to the counter and we click the increment button, and I've clicked it 3 times now, you can see in the console log there's a 3 because it happened 3 times in a row, but it says the test method was called. So you can see we injected this service into, we injected this test injection service into another component, and we called a method inside of it. So the services, again, it's just a way to share the code and the functionality to a lot of different components and potentially even other, you'll make these services inside of your libraries and then share them with other people or other projects over NPM packages. The service worker, I haven't actually used these myself, but I believe it's to do, it's intended to be used if you have some sort of like background tasks that are going on. Maybe you want to clean some cache up at some interval or something like that. I believe that's what the service worker and web workers are for. Don't quote me on those. Do your own research. If you find you need to use those, go ahead and do that. But I've done a lot of websites and I don't believe I've had to use either of these now. Most of the time because I use the .NET backend. The things that I would want to do on intervals and stuff, I would just implement as SQL Server jobs or maybe something in the .NET on a timer. But for the most part, I don't handle those things in the applications themselves. I try to avoid that if it's possible. And that takes us through the Angular CLI generate commands. There's other commands there. You can add other, I guess these are schematics and stuff. You can create your own templates that way. I haven't done that too much myself either. But if we look at the angular.json one more time, and we scroll to the very top of it, you can see that there's some schematics here. I believe you would just reference your schematics here, your custom ones, and they would become available to use with the ng generate command. So something to just have in the back of your head that you can create your own schematics, that maybe the components don't generate the way that you want to with all of your pages, and all of your pages have a specific style that you have applied to them. Maybe you want to create a custom schematic for that. Or, I'm not too sure, the other scenarios, but just know that it's available for you to put your own templates in here and make them available and be able to do the cool things that it's doing, like generating multiple files and going and adding them to the related app module and stuff like that. So it's a very robust system from everything I've seen and read, and I would take advantage of it if you think that it can help you out. Maybe every time you create a component, you're going and you're deleting the spec file, or you're going and you're adding some sort of CSS to it. Those kinds of things can become burdensome, and the new developer that's working with you will forget to do it on some of the pages, and you just want to enforce those standards. It's really nice to be able to kind of enforce that kind of stuff. What else do we have with the Angular CLI? Besides the update and the generate commands, I don't do anything with them. But let's just go ahead and hit ng. And so you can see that there's ng add. I guess that's another way to add libraries instead of doing it with the npm command. Maybe it does some additional checks. I'm not too sure. I've never used it. But you can go down this list. Obviously, ng build is what's happening when you try to build for production or for test. Deploy, config, these are all things. The serve, that's that live development server that we run, and that command is automatically being run in our packages.json as part of the pipeline that we use. You can see that test command, and then of course version. So there's quite a few things that are in here and available. I just there's not generally a need to do too many. Maybe you want to use linting, but for the most part, the plugins, the TypeScript plugins and stuff that we have set up are fine. Again, if you wanted to implement some sort of rules, you could definitely just set up the linting and add a rule, and it would tell everybody that naming your variables with a first letter that's uppercase is no good, or something like that. And that's it for the Angular CLI, and we added a new page with the new route to that page. So that's going to wrap up this 4th video in the series. Again, I appreciate you guys watching and following, and I'll see you in the next video.